Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has revealed just how severe the stakes are in Canada's fight with President Donald Trump. Speaking today at the Canada-US Summit, Trudeau said this to a room full of business leaders moments after media were being ushered out of the room.
Mr. Trump has it in mind that one of the easiest ways of doing that is absorbing our country. And it is a real thing. In my conversation with him on...
Okay, about an hour later, two of Trudeau's senior ministers appeared before reporters, and they emphasized the threat Canada faces.
Canada is free. Canada is sovereign. Canada will choose its own destiny. Thank you very much.
There will be no messing with the 49th parallel, period.
The message I want to send to Canadians is this country is strong. Don't screw with us. We will come out ahead.
So all of this heightened tension appears to also be causing a mood swing amongst voters. Here's a snapshot of different polls. Now, ECOS has reported the most dramatic shift, putting the Liberals nationally just 3 points behind the Conservatives. That is a surge not seen anywhere else. Last month, Abacus data still had the Conservatives ahead of the Liberals nationally by 21 points. Then Leger had it at 18, Nanos at 16, and this week, Ipsos has the Conservative lead at just 13. It all still points to a solid Conservative win, but is that lead still solid? It's time to bring in our party insiders on all of this. Greg McEachern is a former Liberal ministerial staffer. Fred Delory is a former Conservative campaign manager. And Melanie Richer is a former communications director for the NDP. Okay, we're going to get to the polls and stuff in a moment. I do want to just talk a little bit about the clip we had there of Justin Trudeau off the top saying it was serious because in my conversations, and that's when the mic got cut off. We reported earlier that in that conversation, they had two conversations on Monday, the day of the pause. And between the first one and the second one, a senior U.S. official called the Canadian government and said Trump may start threatening treaties. And then when they had their later call, which was around 3 o'clock, Trump opened the conversation by saying, Justin, I've been reading the 1908 treaty, which is an agreement between the United Kingdom and the U.S. to draw, map, and maintain the border between Canada and the U.S. And he said it was very interesting, and it was seen as an attempt to destabilize and sort of mess with the negotiations. Now, they expected it because they're giving the heads up. They've dealt with Trump before. This is very art of the deal stuff, and it didn't faze them, and they didn't respond in a significant way to it. But Greg, what does it say that Trudeau is telling a room full of people about how serious he views the president, and things like this are happening in the phone calls between the two continental leaders?
On Wednesday, I ran into an official, a high-ranking official, nonpartisan, and they said something to me about that they had heard about the call with President Trump, the Prime Minister, and they used terms that were, kind of that we use a lot lately to describe President Trump and his actions. And I kind of shrugged, yeah, it's a day that ends in Y. But they left me with the impression that there was something else here, that there was something a bit more significant that kind of perhaps was at a different level. After you reported that detail, I had to look up that treaty. I think it's signed
so
by.
did I.
On behalf of Canada, I think it's signed by Edward VII. So, but it is quite scary. We are in a time where sovereignty seems to be questioned more and more. We have Russia and Ukraine. We have what you reported earlier about China and foreign interference and the allegations around the Freeland campaign. We've discussed at length the actions of India on Canadian soil. And we have Donald Trump musing about Canada becoming the 51st state and just ignoring and negating, our just since 1867. Again, that's a political start. Yes, I know Canada existed a long time before that. Yeah. But we've done a lot. We've done a hell of a lot. And to have, our next door neighbor after all this time, and I think the Prime Minister on Saturday night had a real moment where he reminded Canadians in his effort to remind Americans of this is no way to treat an ally.
Yeah, this is the treaty here. Teddy Roosevelt, his acting Secretary of State, signed it. Like we all got Wikipedia, thank God. But Mel, what do you make of this? Like, the Prime Minister is normally not in the practice of saying to large crowds intimate details of conversations, but he did it at this summit in Toronto, and then word started to leak out exactly what was going on. And this is not normal sort of chatter.
Not normal at all. Not normal at all. And I think maybe reason for the Prime Minister to say this is, I think we kind of need everybody on both sides of the borders to say, hey, this is really going to harm us, and this is really going to harm us quickly. We saw reports of some of the ministers talking about how U.S. businesses are bringing this up directly with President Trump. We saw reports of how Canadian subsidiaries who have American partners or who are related to American businesses are raising this and are saying, this is going to harm you, this is going to harm me. And I think maybe, I can't imagine that the folks in that room didn't already take this seriously, didn't already plan for that. But I think that's a signal of smarten up, like we need to take this seriously. Is it wise to do that when we know that the president really reacts when you attack his character, or really reacts when he feels like he's being made a fool? I don't know that that's a smart move. I think that's maybe probably the question of, was that, particularly because he said media were just leaving the room.
I know.
Like, it's not even just
Wait till they're out and the doors are closed,
and again, it's like a large group of folks, so maybe that gets reported anyways, but like, it feels maybe like a slip that didn't need to happen, and there was maybe another way to really stress the seriousness without doing that. But I think it's hard, and you're talking about how do you manage this conversation when it doesn't really seem that there's a goal, that there's no way to reason. The goal posts keep moving to, we want you to do this about the border, we want you to do this about, and then, well, no, actually it's about economic
And next week
strength.
there's a tariff, general tariff for all countries coming.
So how do you do that other than we're all together and we're fighting back together? And maybe that was the goal of sharing those comments in that room today.
Yeah, I mean, Fred, what do you make of this? Like, there's other reporting, the Toronto Star and others, that Trudeau went on to talk about how Trump wants our critical minerals, and this is why he's talking about Greenland, because there's issues there, and then also access to fresh water with the ice caps. There's other theories I've heard put out there. I mean, what do you make of this being the nature of the conversation between the two?
Oh, we're in a bad spot in terms of our biggest ally and trading partner and friend, closest neighbor, only neighbor, is now knocking on our door. We've been kind of isolated from a lot of world issues in terms of a lot of border issues because we've had one
really successful
I know we have
one.
Denmark in a sense, but there are we've had this great relationship for so long, and we were not prepared for this, and this is a complete mental change for our country to deal with this. And we saw Steve Bannon this week, who was a former Trump advisor and now a top podcaster. I think The War Game is his podcast, talking about the Arctic and how it's a soft underbelly of Canada defense, where the Arctic is a changing world. There's all of these countries, Russia, who is I would say an enemy of ours, Norway, the US is up there with Alaska, and Greenland and Denmark are there. We're the most underdeveloped of all of the Arctic nations. Yep. We are vulnerable there. We've done nothing to build it up as a country. And he's pointing it out, and these Americans are talking about it. And now you talk about Trump doing it, he's giving life to all of these other American folks who are looking at these targets, and it's going to become a part of their belief system now that they can go take this.
Okay, look, where this goes, we don't know. The next phone call, the next tweet, the next Truth Social post, who knows? But Fred, as our resident election enthusiast, I want to bring back the polling numbers and get your sense on this, because we are seeing some movement. It all still shows a pretty decisive lead, with the exception of the Ecos poll, which I'm not going to criticize Frank Graves or his methodology there, but is an outlier compared to the others, at least in terms of how narrow the gap is. But Fred, we've seen leads of 27, 28 points shrink to like 12, 13. There's a poll in the Globe and Mail today that Nanos did that people prefer Mark Carney over Pierre Poilievre to deal with Donald Trump. What's your sense of how all of this is shaking up the mood and what the election's going to be about?
There's a number of factors here. It is a volatile electorate, but at the same time, Justin Trudeau was at the lowest of lows. You couldn't go anywhere but up if you were the Liberals. And once he left, that's exactly what we saw. Liberals always tend to go up when they don't have a leader as well in polls. But it's not. It just means you get to put, and I don't mean that as a shot at Liberals, you just get to put what you feel the leader could be. And you're not looking at any possible negatives because you don't know who the leader is.
Do you think people think it's going to be Mark Carney, though, based on his front-runner status at this point?
I don't think people know who Mark Carney is or what's. I know we in the bubble think Mark Carney's got this locked. I don't think anyone's really thinking outside of that, and I don't think people know who he is. They know he's the former Bank of Canada governor and Bank of England, and that sounds interesting. And I think that opens the door, and that's why.
Yeah, it sounds serious.
Yeah.
Like this is a serious person.
Now, he'll have to once he gets into that actual spotlight, he'll have to perform, and the Conservatives will have to show where he can't perform.
Right. So Mel, on that, like, I don't know if it's just bubble people who paid attention to it, but Leger did have an interesting poll. Shows the Liberals have come back to about 29, first tied for first in Quebec after being third. but then a suggestion that if Carney were the leader, they could go as high as 37, 38. So Quebecers have paid attention, which I think is interesting. How do you view the volatility there?
I think it's super interesting, and probably agree with what Fred was saying of there's an option that seems that it could be possible with the Prime Minister, with Justin Trudeau. It did not seem possible. So I think the opening of doors, that there is potentially a path for the Liberals, probably gives them a bump. I think the world in which we live in right now, though, is very much dominated by everything that President Trump is saying. And if the ballot box question ends up being, who do you trust to take on this guy, I can appreciate why people think, Mark Carney, to your point, central banker, serious guy. And some of the criticism that we've seen against Pierre Poilievre of not necessarily statesman-like, not necessarily steady hand, somebody that you trust on the world stage, if that's the question, maybe organically folks will see that. But I think it's up to the opposition parties to define exactly who Mark Carney is. If you are living through an affordability crisis, if you are living through I cannot afford my life, do you trust a central banker to make this decision for you? Probably not. I don't think he understands what I'm going through. I don't think he understands what it's like to have a hard time making ends meet, to, I can't pay my mortgage, I can't find my rent. So I really do think it'll probably depend on two things. What are we up against in March? Are we living down again this tariff threat? Every tariff's been implemented and, the cost of everything is up and jobs have been lost? Or are we, still worried about the cost of living? And is this the guy that we trust to fix that? So I think that it'll be dependent on that and really how the opposition defines them.
Greg, I mean, how do you view it? This is still Prime Minister Poilievre with a big Conservative majority with these numbers. But your crowd has gone from extinction level polling to opposition level polling, which that's a good day for you, right?
We're number 2.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you were 4 or 5.
Few months there, yeah.
And I think that's a good point. Is that don't rush into this. I mean, 2 weeks ago we had some hint of this, and I didn't even name any of the pollsters when I mentioned it. I said it's going to be interesting to watch. We are starting to see a trend. We also see some things. There was reporting this week from Radio Can that the Conservatives were going to change their approach. They denied that. Abbas Rana in the Hill Times today seems to have confirmed that is. He has got some other sources.
Canada first as opposed to axe the tax.
Yeah, so I guess Canada isn't broken. That would be my big lesson from the last week. But I think the other thing I noticed is that for the most part, the Conservative leader on his podium has always had axe the tax, and this week at his event he did not. So I think there was kind of a signal sent there as well that there is some sort of movement. I was at an event this week and I heard Carney speak, and he referenced Nova Scotia, very close to Fred and I, and he talked about being in 2 different rooms, and that the difference that he's seeing is that rooms that a couple of months ago would have been filled with anger are now very quiet, and people are very, very worried. And again, this was on the weekend before we got our 30-day stay with Trump. I even saw that I was on a rural highway here on Sunday. I stopped in a gift and food store that I know, and the co-owner was there, and she was able to tell me right away how much in her store was from the U.S., and that was going to be it for a while. So in terms of awareness, I think I saw a poll this week. This was the news story that Canadians were most engaged with since the pandemic. So this is a big moment, and I think this is why, to Mel's point about, it's a time for serious people.
So this Carney event was here in Ottawa?
This, no. The one that I was at was here in Ottawa. Sorry.
Okay, all right.
But I was
Is he going to do any national Canadian interviews while he's in the capital city? Because CNN and BBC have had their chance. Any idea? Do the Liberals know if they're candidates?
I knew you were going to do this, David.
I can
list all the places. But you know what? You know how I feel in this. I would like him to be here because I think he'd be good.
I'm just raising it to
but
be
if he needed to be here, needed to be here, he would be here.
No, when he does it, it's strategic, the Liberals tell me, but when Poilievre does it, it's offensive, apparently. Right. I mean, give me a break, right? Like, what are we... Anyway, this is my little issue, but quickly. Yeah.
Just one question, or one point on polls. I am going to be curious to see if Carney could get his numbers as high as John Turner and Kim Campbell did.
Okay. Well, and we'll see. Anyway, there's a lot of things. You wanted to jump in there after
Yeah, I was just going to say, one of the interesting things from, I think, the same poll that you were talking about, the Ecos poll this week, one of the framing was the the Conservatives had the lockdown on anger, and they were able to shoot up because folks were so angry, whereas now the pulse seems to have shifted to fear, and we're scared of what's going to happen, and it seems unclear who will be best able to respond to that. So that's kind of what I'm paying attention to, as a new maybe question mark in the where is the pulse of folks at, and who responds to that.
So I wonder about this, right? How people view the leaders through the lens of the president.
Right.
Because, you know, a year ago, it was Trudeau, Singh, Poilievre, and you did a comparison of the three. But now, Fred, it's going to be Trump, Poilievre, Trump, Singh, Trump, Carney/Freeland, and that's a comparator that people are going to think about. And the balance of power in the legislature, this may hurt the Bloc, this could hurt the NDP, because people think about who do they want and who do they want to deal with this. And that is, we don't know where that goes.
Yeah. A few months ago, the election was going to be Poilievre versus Trudeau. Now it's those leaders versus Trump. Who can take on Trump? Who can deal with Trump? And that's where the change is going to happen. It's an interesting point you talk. It was anger before, now it's fear. So all leaders need to show, if they're going to be successful, who can combat and who can take on Trump and who has the plan to do it. Poilievre, for his point, what I think he's going to do is point out the last 9 years where the Liberals haven't done well on, they have not knocked down interprovincial trade, which is one of the major issues we have right now. They have not got our natural resources.
But they did well with Trump.
Did they?
Yeah, the first NAFTA negotiation, they got the pause. Like, they did well with Trump in the first mandate. You know, like, so they had that. Right?
But for setup for this, this whole, like, what we're dealing right now, if he's bringing in these tariffs now, if he's bringing in various things and he's trying to encroach on our sovereignty, how are we prepared to diversify our markets? And I think Poilievre will have a good angle to run on that, where the Liberals will struggle because they've been in power for a decade.
Right.
And we'll have a hard
He'll
story
point to all
to
the
tell.
pipelines the Harper government got built, right? You know, Greg, what are your thoughts?
I think this is, Chandler and Ross had a better time pivoting that couch than Poilievre does on this issue.
That's a reference to old
It's a
even
Gen
from
X
me, but yeah,
reference.
I
I know
gotcha.
my people. The rest of you probably just fell asleep. But I think when you saw Poilievre struggle a bit, I thought of this poll that Environics Research did last fall. Ian Bailey wrote about it in the Globe and Mail, and the demographic in Canada that improved their view of Trump were people who identified as conservatives. It went up 11 points to 44%. So 44% of self-identified conservatives in October were in approval of Trump. And I think this is part of the problem for the conservatives, because Elon Musk, praised Poilievre. Trump was supposed to be their friend. We have the hot mic moment with the premier.
They're going to have a challenge in their coalition, right? But they still have 41% in the polls, right? So, like, how do the Liberals capitalize on this? Like, what is it Carney, Freeland, Ruby Dalla, whoever needs to put on the table to show that they can deal with it? Because the people who did it last time, with the exception of Freeland, are leaving.
Well, to finish the thought, I thought Poilievre did not. It took him a long time to get to the place where he's being as critical as everyone else.
Sure.
And there's self-identified, or there's conservatives prominent in Canada, like the Premier of Alberta, who is the person who's always defending what Trump is doing. For the Liberals, David, this was kind of the conversation that I heard a lot this week, is, was this the Trudeau cabinet the whole time? They seem untethered. They're
urgent.
They come on shows. They answer questions. They talk like real humans. There was a moment, Anita Anand, people have been critical about, like, I can see the prof in her. She did this litany of all the things on defense spending. David McGuinty on your show. I saw his brother, and I said, this was a guy who was not allowed to talk because he was chair of the...
And a psychop,
and he seemed like eager to be here. So maybe now we kind of have the cabinet that Canada deserves, where they're not looking over their shoulder about some kid in short pants being, going to tell them what they said was wrong.
After 10 years, maybe we should give them
I know.
a chance.
Well, I will give you, I absolutely will give you that.
It is remarkable how unburdened they all get when they're not running again and not seeking a leadership, and they can just say things. It's kind of refreshing. If only politics was like that all the time. But Mel, how do you see it? Because in some of the poll summaries that we showed, there's the NDP are not faring well in this, and as people, like, some people go back to the Liberals for comfort and the Conservatives endure, Jagmeet Singh's getting squeezed sort of out of the big conversation and maybe in terms of public support. What's your sense of where they fit into this right now?
I think it'll probably change again once we figure out who the leader is. I think that there's an opportunity here. Polling has gone up. I think it's something to watch. I think that there's an opportunity if it is somebody like Mark Carney standing at the end of the day. And the reason I think that is, like, we've seen, some of his comments, some of his wife's comments about having $1 million salary and not being able to afford a home. That's all going to come back. Those not being able to understand what quote unquote real people are going through, how hard it is to make ends meet, how hard it is to do the things, and with the threat of Trump, how even more unaffordable things are going to be. And I think with that, if he's the person standing at the end of this, I think it's a massive opportunity for Jagmeet to step into it and talk about how he does understand what people are going through, and here's what I'm going to do to be different. Obviously, if that question is Trump, that's way harder to do. But
how does Jagmeet Singh make the case that I'm the person who will deal with Trump when they are the fourth party in Parliament right now? You know what I mean? Like, him getting to the Prime Minister job that's a miracle at this point, unless something dramatically changes. How does he make that case if that becomes the issue about who can deal with the guy in the White House?
So I would maybe reframe it as who's the guy who stands up for people, who's the guy who stands up for Canadians. I think what we saw coming out of Saturday, to your point about the Prime Minister being strong, I agree. It was like, oh, where has this guy been a little bit, right? Like he was quite good, not just quite good at the way that he spoke, but in talking about what it is that, Canadians are. Folks who care about their neighbors, folks who care about, sticking together and doing the good things. I think focusing on that interprovincial trade, focusing on what do we need to do here to make sure that we're less reliant, to make sure that we are not staring down the barrel of a gun every time that this guy says something. I drove everywhere on Sunday to find Canadian paint because I'm painting, my new home, and I couldn't find it. There's no Canadian paint anymore. Apparently, it's been bought by an American company. There may be a company somewhere out in BC, and if there is, I'm sorry for saying this out loud, but the options were either you buy American paint or you buy British paint, and I ended up buying British paint because I was mad, like most folks in my
You're
universe.
You're a good Commonwealth kid,
but I am, like that has always been important to my dad. My dad does always say that you buy local, you try to support the folks that support you, and you find a way to make it work. And that feeling, I think most people, if not everyone, woke up Sunday morning being like, yeah, we're in this together in a way that we probably haven't seen here in Canada in a long time, with all the, the flags and everything, the division from the last few years. So tapping into that feeling and what can we do here? How can we support growth here so that we're not at the whim of this guy all the time, I think is an opportunity for Jagmeet to step into.
Look, a lot of interprovincial trade is a thing that can help boost productivity. But Fred, we're talking about like harmonizing regulations for long-haul trucking, and like these are not big.
There's a lot to do.
There's a lot there, but it's like it's sandpaper in a regulatory process, as Steve McKinnon called it earlier. Like it's not sort of this instantly changes how you live. You know what I mean? So I don't know how that plays as an election issue, but it's curious to watch as the Liberal leadership and Donald Trump sort of fill up the oxygen in traditional media, not necessarily on digital media. Pierre Poilievre, who drove both, is not driving traditional media right now. He came out with a new thing on fentanyl, life sentences for people trafficking more than 40 milligrams, the constitutionality of which will get tested, and we'll see where that goes. But how does he? You outline what you think the arguments are. We're not used to a time where Pierre Poilievre isn't the guy setting the agenda for people, and he's not doing that right now. What are your thoughts there?
Well, a week ago today, our closest neighbor declared economic war on us.
Yeah.
So the game has changed significantly, and he's going to have to pivot towards that. He's done it. He's come out with his Canada First plan, which is about interprovincial trade. He's talked about fentanyl czar, but he's going to have to tone that message. He's going to have to figure it out, what works, and he's going to have to present that to Canadians. And what I've seen from Poilievre, we all have seen it, he is very quick to adapt and to shift where he is on these things, where he's gone over the last number of years. Watch his leadership race into the first year of his leadership race. He does step up and has, and I think he will with a strong.
I mean, his policy positions change as circumstances change?
I think it's the messaging, right? It's how are you going to deal with these issues? How do we unlock Canada and make us a successful country that can do trade around the world, not just with the United States, but open up these markets for us?
But a question though, a lot of his political style, it's attack, right? And a lot of it is wedge. And when you do a wedge, you split things. Right now, people want unity and pulling together this Team Canada thing. What does he have to do to adapt to that?
Well, the very first thing he said he's going to do, though, in this Canada First plan is bring all the premiers together and to sit down and work on interprovincial trade. There is unity in that. You can have unity in the provinces and the markets but not, you don't have to have unity with the other political parties. We're all competing.
No, but with the
different
electorate, I'm
visions.
talking about people who disagree with him and whatever. How do you pull it together?
Politics is about contrast. The Liberals, I mean, they've been calling Poilievre and linking him to Trump for the last year. You can't say that they're team unity all of a sudden.
Oh no, I wasn't suggesting that. I was just, I mean, we don't know what they're going to be after the 9th of March, right? Is the reality there? So, Greg, I mean, if it's Kearney, if it's Freeland, Bayliss, Gould, Dalla, those are the 5 who, by the way, they all made their payments today. They're all in it. I mean, do you think we'll actually see whoever wins this thing recall Parliament and do a throne speech? Because I'm not so confident. I think we're going to go straight to the election. What's your sense of where we go?
I would like to say it's water cooler conversation, but it's more water. It's watering hole conversation right now in Ottawa, and everybody is trying to game that out. And I know we sound really geeky and boring when I admit that, friends, this is what we talk about. So what is the upside of the successor going into the House and having a speech from the throne? The only thing I can really think of is as a communications tool, and I've been very critical of. Yeah, and again, this would be a new leader, but based on the last 9 years, budgets, fall economic statements, Fred's favorites, speech from the throne have never ever really carried the media day.
But you set yourself up to lose a confidence vote.
And that's the other thing. Right? So people may not remember, but when you lose a confidence vote, and before there was electronics, you throw all the paper up in the air because that was supposed to be the bills. And I remember one that in the last, since I've moved to Ottawa, the last 2 decades, where kids were cutting up paper so the MPs could do it. That is the shot that you will have on TV that night, versus you look like you're in control of your own agenda.
Yeah, and Mel, if it's Mark Carney, he can't even be in the House when it happens, right? He can go to the Senate, but I don't know if the image of I don't want to say an unelected prime minister, but that's kind of what it would be, going to the unelected upper chamber.
Exactly.
To have the
You almost wrote the headline for the NDP there, David.
king's representative read a speech.
I think Carney would like this.
You think so? It's like, it seems to me, if you win, you go, you swear in your cabinet because the ministry is all dissolved, and then you come out and say, Liberals have had their choice. It's time for Canadians to have their choice. Let's go to an election. I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree with you. The only reason I would see the point of doing that is to do exactly that, is to give your reason for why you're going to an election and what you will do, almost as if you were doing, like either a platform launch or whatever, and why not do that and control it yourself, with a crowd of folks instead of MPs and the people that you're saying that you're going to fight for. That's what I would probably do.
Have the cabinet behind you, say, this is my team?
I don't even think I would have the cabinet. I would have regular people. These are the people I'm going to fight. Again, I'm a New Democrat, so the regular folks that I'm going to go fight for, and families and whatnot, that's who I would have standing behind me to do that kind of thing. Unless, there needs to be something in the House because of what's happening with the U.S., and then there may be some, technicalities that you may not help.
The problem with...
Sorry?
Maybe a deal made?
No deal made.
Supplying confidence agreements.
Unless
Scotch together. Door for that. Are you not
no, I
leaving
am
the door?
not leaving the door open for that.
Notwithstanding that, there is a
I'm
lot
not in
of problem
charge
because the
either.
timetable's pretty tight when the House returns, right? And there are estimate votes that are needed. This government, there are things that have to be paid for. And so there's a lot of crunch if you call the House.
But those would be paid for through special warning if there were an election. So Fred, just quickly, I'll give the last word to you on this because you're all about narrative, right? Do you let the Governor General deliver your narrative, or do you do it for yourself and go?
That's the big point. Do you want Mary Simon there reading what your message is? That's not the way to do it. If you cannot make a deal with the NDP, which I think they will try to do, and if they fail at that, then absolutely they should just call an election.
Do you think Mark Carney will try to do a deal with the NDP if he wins? Do you think Chrystia Freeland will? Because the Chrystia Freeland running the leadership has very different policies than the Chrystia Freeland who was the finance minister.
Like 2 weeks ago.
I'm not sure if there's a deal there with the NDP.
Look, I don't know. I think he may try to. I don't know what the deal could be. I don't know, if we're talking about the issues with Trump. We're talking the border plan that Trudeau brought in needs legislative change to be effective. So if there's something there has to be some kind of a deal made if he wants to do that before the election. It's possible strategically, though, if he could buy himself 6 months to introduce himself to Canadians instead of win a leadership, go right into an election. It takes time to plan an election. It's going to be a hell of a run.
Okay, we're out of time. I didn't even get to touch on the Freeland thing, but I'll do that later in the show. Okay, I got to say goodbye. Fred Delory, Greg McEachern, Melanie Richer.